everyone, William Soliman here. Welcome to Beyond the Pill with Dr. Will. Today I'm excited. We have with us Dr. Sotirios Sturgiopoulos as our guest. Dr. Sturgiopoulos is the current CEO of A2A Pharmaceuticals. Welcome, Sotirios.
Well, thank you, Will. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Always good to see you. So for those of you that don't know, Sotirios and I have known each other for some time. Sotirios really is a veteran in the industry, knows a lot about what happens in pharma and his current role. So tell us a little bit, Sotirios, about, kind of your background for the folks that don't know you, what you're currently doing.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Will. For me, it started all with wanting to be a physician from a young age. Everyone else was playing cops and robbers. When everyone was shot, I was the one taking care of them to make sure they were healed. But all kidding aside, it's one of those things. I always feel that medicine, in one way or another, is like religion. Being a person of faith, where it's a calling, less of a career option. It's something that started from a young age for me. Unfortunately, I was discouraged by my folks to do this, believe it or not.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
you feel the Greek American parents wanted to get their kid to be a doctor, but quite the opposite. We wanted to be restaurateurs. We got to feed the world, as my
Right.
father would say. But I made a huge decision to go this way, and I can tell you, really, I've never taken a look back. It's been an amazing ride. I always tell young people who come up to me, they're like, "Oh, did you always want to do this?" I said, "You mean be a CEO of a biotech company?" I don't think that was a choice that we were thinking about much in 1980. I'm not going to say the years, but uh, it's interesting how I always tell people I wanted to be an orthopedist, and I couldn't be as further away from being an orthopedist right now, except for the old saying, orthopods, they're big as an ox and just as smart. I think that fits
Right.
more than anything else. And please do not get offended if you're an orthopedist out there. I'm just joking. But for the most part, it's been an incredible ride. You know as well as I do, Will, that you go in one way, and there's so much in medicine today, and there's so much that is, in one way or another, interconnected with the world of healthcare, life science, medicine, that it's just an amazing ride to take. And I always tell any of the folks that are early on in their careers is, don't force an avenue that you think you should go to. Look at what's in front of you. There's so many alleyways that you can go in, and means, and really taking a road that you probably never thought you would do, but something is actually driving you there, and be open to it. Don't put blinders in medicine. There's a
Sure.
lot of great aspects. So I feel that my background has been nothing but a great opportunity, and it's been a wonderful ride.
So were you born in Greece? Remind me, or were you born in the
uh,
US?
yeah, this is one where I always get people. I was born in Sydney, Australia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Moved to South Africa to Greece. And in once again, 19, my parents decided they wanted to move to the U.S. Obviously for opportunities. It was in Greece. It was post junta, and there were a lot of great opportunities for people. So families either fled to Germany, Australia, or the U.S. And my family was one of the U.S. Families that came over here. So yeah, we used to say we're off the boat, but people don't take boats anymore to go
Right,
across.
right.
Um,
So how
off
old were you when you came to the US then?
six, I was almost six, 5 to 6
Okay.
old, around there. So yeah, this is why I don't have my father's. God rest his soul. His really heavy Greek accent, and you can actually get more of a New York accent out of me than anything else. So
Right, yeah,
yeah,
because I don't hear an accent. But I mean, so how was that, right? So you talked about that a little bit, but
yeah.
growing up in the US, and you kind of have this juxtaposition between what's happening at home. You have the Greek culture at home, you have the US culture in the school. I mean, I could relate to that, as being a first generation American coming from Egypt. Um, but how was that like in terms of integrating with the kids at the school and really kind of feeling like you fit in? Did you feel like you were kind of an outsider at times in the school system here in the US?
It's a great question, and I always find that I always tell people that the generation that I grew in, 70s, 80s, a little bit of the 90s, I was, much older then. Um, it was a much more inclusive uh, time, I would say. When I came to the States, we came straight to New York. First apartment I lived in was in Sunnyside, Queens.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I remember bars on the windows. First kids I met were a couple of Puerto Rican kids from around the corner. They stole my bike, but I don't hold ill will. But they did what they had to do, and I can't blame them for it. But I actually found that we came to a very inclusive place. I didn't feel so much out of sorts. Kids didn't make me feel like I was a stranger because we were many strangers put together.
Mm-hmm.
People that came from different places. One of the beauties of this country, right? It allows so many from so many far away places to come together, and I found it to be one of the most incredible, I would say, ways of growing up because it provided diversity to a kid who came from, imagine such a homogeneous, population in Greece and Athens. I had rarely seen anybody who was of color. I'd never seen anyone really Asian, so it was just a beautiful experience. And till this day, I marvel in that opportunity that I had being able to do that. But typical of Greek Americans, we found a predominantly Greek area to go to, and many people know it as Astoria, Queens.
Right.
People flock to it for the food. But it gave me an opportunity to still keep a position in my people, quote unquote, but gives me the opportunity also to learn about so many other cultures. So I really believe it was just a unique experience that I will always cherish.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you were the first physician in your family.
First physician, I would say, in a certain group of the Sturgiopolis family. We had another physician who, at the time when we came to the U.S., and pretty much the person I looked up to then that really made me want to be a physician, it was my uncle John Exathalis, who orthopedist at Lennoxville Hospital. Um, you know, Very successful immigrant story. Came in the early '60s to the U.S. Back then, the FemGems, right, the foreign medical graduate exam,
Mm-hmm.
were provided for, and he actually took them and answered in Greek and still passed. So
Wow.
it goes to show you the need they had for physicians back then.
Right, right, right. Wow. He answered in Greek and still passed.
And not only did he pass, but then he also got a residency at Bellevue in orthopedic surgery.
Wow. Which is a
But
difficult residency to get. I mean, nowadays,
it
forget
is
about it.
now you have to pretty much promise your first kid, give a kidney.
Right.
Uh, but it was amazing, right? So he said, they gave me the opportunity of being either head and neck surgeon or being an orthopedist, and I wanted to be an orthopedist. I said, wow, amazing. So he was really the first that I knew close enough. There were a couple more in Greece, but no one really within the line of Sturgiopolis from great grandfathers that I had that were definitely physicians. So I kind of stood out a little bit. I was the black sheep. I wasn't the one that wanted to go into business like everyone else.
Yeah.
Shunned a little bit by my folks about that. They thought I was absolutely nuts. But you'll appreciate this being from a family of immigrants is my father would say, what do you want to be a physician for? You're going to be a public servant. I said,
Right, right.
you're
Yeah, the
in
mentality is different.
I said, well, you're in restaurants. What do you think you're doing? He didn't like that answer. He didn't like that answer. But nonetheless, though, I was the first, and I think it's definitely opened up the doors. As I've told my boys, they could do anything they want in this world after medical school. So we're trying to push it.
So you're trying to get a next generation of doctors. So walk me through, because I think a lot of people don't realize who are listening that physicians, many physicians, especially I think in the last decade, we've seen more and more are moving to work in the industry, non-traditional roles. So tell us your story, like how you came to want to work in the pharma industry, how you discovered that, and kind of your journey a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's I find that a lot of people have unique stories that go into industry. Mine was one of those where, after medical school, and I had gone to Europe for medical school, coming back to the US, being able to be, I would say, a competitive candidate for residency, you needed more on your CV. You needed a little bit more than the US students would have to, because, they've proven themselves, right? They got into great schools in the US, and, the competition, I think, when I was applying was amazing. I think there were 20 people for one spot that were
Yeah.
vying. And this opened up the door to a lot of the foreign medical schools that we know of today, including the Caribbean, Europe as well, and so many other places. But I wound up going to the NIH as I looked to get myself a little bit more proficient in science and understand a little bit more, and get myself into a career that would definitely allow me to go to more of the top tier centers and build a career and establish myself in one way or another. That experience was amazing. I had a phenomenal mentor, Dr. Konstantin Stratakis, who had worked on adrenal tumors for years, Cushingoid syndromes of sorts, and he had actually discovered a gene, the PRKR1 alpha, which coded for what we now know as a very rare disorder called Carney's complex, or Carney syndrome, named after a very famous anatomical pathologist, Dr. Carney, Aidan Carney. And what I found really in this monster of and mecca, I would say, of research was there was a split group of I'm going to go into academia, and the other group that said there is no way I'm going to sit there every year trying to get an R01, or try and get funding. It's crazy. I'm going into industry. And that was my first real introduction to industry. For me, it was like, well, what can you do in industry? And, it was, even back then, it was kind of looked at as, the not more conventional way of doing things.
Sure.
You become the black sheep and the odd man out by going to the dark side. You've heard that term, right?
Right.
We use it as if it's like Star Warian,
Right.
let's go to the dark side. And it was interesting how I found some of the phenomenal scientists were doing it. So it brought validity in my mind that this is definitely an avenue which I hadn't really considered before. So leaving the NIH, I went to Albert Einstein Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx. Phenomenal place. Now, mind you, here I am. I had probably more publications than half of the faculty at Einstein from the work I had done at the end. I was there almost 4 or 5 years. So you can just picture how much work was done. And I went there with the intent of, I got great scientific training. Now I need some really good clinical training. And, Jacobi being one of the top New York City hospitals that offers you, the flavor of academia through Albert Einstein, but also, the clinical, I would say, vastness of experience that you can have there. It only, I think, Cook County and Bellevue may have been the only other two that would have been on the level of something like Jacobi. But it really taught me that there's so much more to medicine. So my focus then went from research back into clinical. And I left from there going to Harvard to do a clinical genetics fellowship, thinking I would find a way to combine those two. Very difficult to do when you realize the academic centers, they take you in, and if you can't bring in the grants, they throw you in the clinic. If you
Exactly.
get the grants, you don't get to see the clinic as much. So in one way or another, you sort of have to start making a decision. And it's funny enough, my oldest was born at Mass General when I was a fellow, and my wife absolutely did not appreciate Boston as much as I did, and the cold especially, the snow. The first complaint every day was like, "Oh my God, it's snowing over here. It's horrible. Can I get out of
Right.
so secretly, she started sending notes to Greece about, hey, I think maybe if we can come to Greece, but what am I going to do in Greece? I need to get requalified. How do I do it? And industry came up as an avenue. So it wasn't an avenue that I sought after almost immediately, but it was definitely an avenue that was provided in the sense that it gave someone with a background like mine, and at least the open mind of thinking what we could do, the opportunity to do this. And I went into Bayer in Greece, never having worked in pharma, having lived in Greece since I was a child, but probably one of the best experiences I had. And it solidified my mind that I did the right thing.
Right.
It it combined so many of my qualities, the opportunity to use my experience in science, my know-how in clinical setting, and yet at the same time, the ability to discuss with people and meet new people and put the ideas together, which was something of a bit of a blessing for me. I didn't expect to get that sort of reaction from it. So when we decided to come back from Greece after living there, for quite a couple of years, I would say, with the difficulty that Greece had faced, obviously in 2009, you can imagine, the financial crisis.
Right. Right.
We were running for the hills at that point, and we had to come back. But I didn't make the choice of coming back to the clinic here. I made the choice of staying in industry, and it really gave me a significant amount of experience. I mean, I went from a senior director at Bayer in oncology, and then from there I went to Novartis, continued my experience there. I helped launch a few drugs, even came up with some of the initial, I would say, data and studies for the CDK4/6 that they had there with the Mona Lisa trial 3, which was really a trial that was actually designed by medical affairs, even though some people tell you otherwise. Designed by medical affairs, but then done
Yeah.
with development. And from there, it just kept going. But, I think when I take a look back, all these steps are necessary, but I never shied away from them. I never went, oh, this might be scary, or, this may be difficult. I followed the path that was presented in front of me. Obviously, you try and make educated guesses and assumptions as you move in your career. But what I found was it made me just as happy. It made me, it completed me in so many ways in the sense that it gave me exactly what I was looking for, the satisfaction that I was doing good, even though I was on the dark side, quote unquote. Uh,
Right.
but I always tell people in the clinic, you reach patients on a one-on-one basis. But imagine being able to help people on the thousands to hundreds of thousands basis by just creating something that's
Right.
you know, impactful in their lives based on their illnesses. So it's an interesting road that I've taken, but not one that I've ever regretted.
So now you're the CEO of A2A Pharmaceuticals. So obviously you've come a long way from when you started in the industry. So tell us a little bit about, what the focus is at A2A in terms of some of the work that you guys are doing in terms of your pipeline, the technology. There's some AI components there built in. So tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a great company in the sense that there are multiple successes that we have here, but they are successes that are built on, I would say, incremental improvements. When I first met the gentleman who had just started working on the potential of creating a company called A2A, I met them at the Harvard Club in Manhattan, and we sat there and we had a nice little discussion about what the thoughts are, where they see this. There's a platform that was already sort of put together, but still had a bit of holes, allowing for computational drug design. And this is now, if you figure 2016, it's 7 years ago.
Right.
Where 7 years ago is a long time in the space of computational drug design and computational chemistry. We're not talking about computational biology. We're talking about computational chemistry, where the ability to create a platform that allows you to come up with novel chemical matter, where it really makes sense in the direction that you're going to be able to treat patients. Um, it was an interesting sort of eye opener for me. And the reason was, here I am working on so many big pharma companies. I progressively went into smaller companies because I felt I could be more impactful there. But what I also saw was with a bigger company was more of a process that was, you know, you can't say it was wrong or was right, but it was a process that was built because of the volume that was there, both in people, the work, and everything else. And those are behemoths on their own.
Sure.
And you can easily get lost. But then when you look at smaller companies, they gives you a more intimate opportunity to be impactful and really create some decisions that could definitely help patients. So I found myself progressively going to smaller and smaller, and here I am, in discussion about a novel platform, really focused on the original target was actually our MLL menin inhibitor, which now is in biomia fusion. And Biomia Fusion is a spin-off. It's a company that was created initially from a molecule that we designed. We met Pointstar Investment Group, which was former pharmacyclics gentlemen who knew the space of leukemia and AML, obviously with their success from pharmacyclics with Imbruvica.
Right.
And they took a look at what we were doing and they said, this is interesting. This is definitely something we want to be part of. But we created a company around it, a new co called Biomia Fusion. They took management, and we were able to maintain our position with R&D and whatnot. And look where that is today, right? If you look at A2A and you say, 7 years later, what's your proof of concept? This is a huge proof of concept, right? This is a company that is now public, and we have phase 2 data in diabetes from our initial asset. Which eventually was turned into a covalent inhibitor. We had created a reversible, but then with some novel chemistry that they also did, we were able to come up to BMF 219, which is now showing some phenomenal data. And for us, that's a huge win, right? So this is a company that we started in 2016 around first asset, becomes a new company, is well funded, institutional funding, as well as going public with JP Morgan being the top left. So you know what that means. That's just an amazing
Sure.
accomplishment. And now, we are using our platform with a novel target. Once again, MLL menin inhibitor back then was a novel target. No one had heard about it. Cura and Syndax came out a little bit later, the competitors. And that's what brought it more validity. But here we are with our next asset, where we look to file our IND for our TAC3 inhibitor. And it's a protein-protein interaction inhibitor. And we're looking to file over the next week or so. We have already amassed a tremendous amount of data, especially in triple-negative breast cancer, ovarian, and endometrial. So this is a target that we see specifically has done quite some damage to women and women's cancers. So we feel we could definitely play a huge role in the treatment there, as we've seen some preclinical efficacy data that shows potentially up to 100% regressions.
Wow.
Unheard of as a monotherapy. This is unheard of. So, a company of 4 people started in 2016, still haven't received institutional investment. Our first investors came out of Perth, Australia, with a group of investors that really were around mining. Took a chance, gave us 8.5 million over this time. And now, we are based on the funding that we have that we could use from the Biomea shares, because we still own more than 4 million shares of Biomea, we can fund ourselves. We actually don't need anybody, which is amazing.
That's a good position to be in. Yeah.
It's a great position. How many companies do we know with only 4 people have created a successful spinoff with data first in human, going public, and now is about to do that again and has raised less than $8.5 million of money?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. It's definitely impressive.
It's unheard of. It's unheard of. So we're a company that are really focused on the target, novel targets. We look for biologically validated targets. We don't always look for clinically validated. Our area is small molecules. We create small molecules, but the way we create them, we look for specific protein-protein interactions that we can actually disrupt. And we feel that that's an area based on our platform that allows us huge successes we've seen so far.
So let's talk about that a little bit. About you talked about funding. There's been a lot of question and concern. I know at the last J.P. Morgan meeting, there's a lot of conversation kind of swirling around, given obviously what's happened now with SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, and whatnot, and some of the concerns around that, and how that might impact biotech funding, and would biotech funding kind of dry up? What have you seen, or what are your thoughts on that?
It's so there's multiple parts to this, right? It's not one cut and dry answer here.
Right.
Things that we've seen, if you look over the past 5 to 10 years, investments in private owned companies have been okay because the market was okay, right? There have been a few successes. So people felt much more inclined to, I would say, fund private companies. That looks like it's drying up. And it's drying up because right now, you can imagine over the past year and a half, we've seen a lot of startups that have, for lack of a better word, failed.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of money has gone into companies from some of the best well-known VCs out there. And, those are painful. Add to the market and the way the market's been erratic, and obviously there's so many different components to it. People have lost a significant amount of money. You saw what the biotech index looked like. It's dropped significantly over the past 2 years, year and a half. It's funny how if you try to get funding, I would say in January of 21 versus today, you can get 30 million like this.
Right.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Today, you get 30 million looks looking at you like you're crazy.
Right. Right.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And really, it's a knee-jerk reaction that many of these funds have because they need to preserve. They need to also explain to their LPs where their money is going. So more of them will actually do a public sort of action where they'll go to a public company, they'll support that. There's always ways to get liquidity around a public company, right? As a private, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
That's been a bit of an issue. The trend that we've been seeing, I would say, more and more over the past few years is a lot of these very well-known VCs have taken a model where they're less likely to, at least from the experience that we have, less likely to fund a company that its shareholders are predominantly founders. And what they'll wind up doing, though, is they rather go straight to an academic source of something that's absolutely brand new, and take it over and control 80-90% of it right from the get-go. So they're incubating companies,
Right.
more
Right.
looking to fund novel companies out there. That is, an inevitable pathway that they were going to take because obviously they get much more control. They have much more of say what's going to happen in the company. Getting one board seat versus populating the board is, a whole different animal, right? And it gives them a real power sensation over the company.
Yeah.
So we see that more and more. And, without even naming the VCs, you see the companies that are coming out and, you hear about how one of the partners from X VC is now, the CEO of this newfound company.
Yeah. What a coincidence. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been, been funded with 20, 30 million right from the get-go.
Right. Right.
It's rare that you find companies like ours that will get this funding. It really comes down to, at that point, data. And really, what do you have that is almost guaranteeing somebody a success? I can't blame a lot of the VCs today with the, I would say, concern about going and funding a novel target. It's not easy. If you don't have at least some sort of initial clinical safety data, it really becomes, a
It's a gamble. Yeah. It's a gamble.
it's a
One of the things that I think people don't realize, right, who are maybe listening to this podcast, depending on their level of familiarity with the industry, this year is, or actually the end of last year, one of the biggest bills got passed, the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, and basically this is the first time ever where the government said that the Medicare Part D drugs now can actually be negotiated in terms of their pricing, right? That's never happened before, and that obviously puts a cap for a lot of these big drugs on the pharma side in terms of how much money they can make, how much profit they can derive from these products. Being that you're a CEO, what have you heard about that? How much impact do you think that's going to have? Because what I'm hearing, and I talk to a lot of different people within different companies in the industry, they're obviously not happy about it. You saw AbbVie pulled out of pharma, the trade organization. Teva pulled out later. I hear now others want to pull out of pharma, being members of that trade group, which is a big deal. That's really never happened before, at least since I remember in recent history. So what's your take on that? I mean, combined with this issue of maybe some of the funds drying up, and then, how's that going to impact innovation? Then there's some of these legislative constraints with IRA. There's a lot of talk now about reforming what's happening on the PBM side, the pharmacy benefit manager side. How do you think this could impact innovation? Like if you were talking to the public and want them to understand what impact this could have on innovation, what would you want them to know?
It's a loaded question. I'll put it to you this way. Most people don't realize that much of the inflation of the prices in this country are multifold. It's not, there obviously are, significant amount of, I would say, profits to a company at the end, but nobody's doing this just for altruism. That's understood, just like anything else, right?
Right.
But when you think about how much does it take to create a drug, right? What is the monetary value or finance that's needed to get a drug to work? It's 1 in 10 actually winds up working, and the 10 that have been tried are about $2 billion each, right? So you're looking at investments of close to $20 billion before you get one that could probably pay for the others, right? That's a component that most people don't know and don't understand. There's also an aspect of this that I always look at, that is how many people are employed doing this. And if you're worried about the effects of a drug on the economy, imagine closing out much of manufacturing, the inability to have sales work for all these groups, right? While many people are focusing on what the profits are for the C-suite, it's not only that, it feeds the mouths of many people, right? When you look at a company like Pfizer, the size, the sheer volume of it, how many people actually work for Pfizer? And you can't think that all these people are getting these monstrous profits.
Right.
But it's just like GM. You don't want GM to close. You didn't want it to close because of so many people working, and then in that site. One site alone can actually provide how many jobs. So that's an aspect that I think people don't realize. So take that take the fact that many drugs fail, and we've spent God knows how much money to get to it. Now, what we have seen is a bit of a trend from bigger companies where they're building smaller business units. I think that's starting to give a little bit more of a sense of, you need to bring more innovation and less fluff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think while the government is right in trying to control the prices, be careful what you wish for and be careful what you do, because the more you stifle things, the less we're going to be able to bring in novel therapies. I get very upset when I see a 5th generation EGFR or 8th generation, a 12th generation, VEGF inhibitor. That to me is more of a sign of less innovation and ingenuity. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that each one of those doesn't have a component that might be improving or be better. Yes. But if we're just trying to get another one out to the market, that doesn't bring anything. And I think the government's seen that, right? They see that some things like this happen. They can't explain it. So they say, you know what? All this surplus, we don't need this. We need more new things coming in. Obama had actually done a good thing by putting some money back into the NIH and giving them an opportunity to act more like a biotech, where, hey, if you're coming up with real therapies, I'm going to fund you, but that also meant that there had to be a much better relationship between industry and the government as well. And it had to allow for a give and take, a little bit of leeway for both. You
Mm-hmm.
can't just totally ask from one without giving them something in return. And I think that's something that would have been great to continue. It's been very difficult. Now, add to the challenges of how today's culture is, where we also have wars that are limiting so many things for us out there, right? I mean, supplies, the know-how from other countries. I think I've mentioned to you before, you look at Ukraine. Ukraine at one point was an opportunity for us to use some of the best clinical centers in the world and potentially have them as clinical trial sites for new therapies out there. Australia is doing it, and they're doing a wonderful job. But there's only so many countries and so many places that you could do this. So we've lost a great opportunity there, on top of the raw materials and everything else, right? So I think when you put all this together, the one thing that most Americans have no clue about when it comes to pharma is that we also supply most of third world countries with drugs.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the inflation of the price that we have today is also to cover so many other places in the world. And it's not something that's really understood or known. And, your patients in this country who are suffering and are only receiving Medicare and have very difficult times making ends meet, but yet need drugs that are, at least $200 to $500 a month, are saying, well, hey, that's not my problem. But that model has been existing for a long, long time. So the government can try and impose as much as they can, but it'll be short-lived and short-sighted because there is so much more. And unless the government is willing to give certain breaks to these big companies that are trying to do so many things at once, because they feel that that's what they need to do to be able to get new treatments to patients, get treatments to patients, provide discounts, cover the world. It's not easy.
Right.
Definitely not easy.
So, I mean, you present the case, I think, a good case for why we need to continue to invest and fund, obviously, research, and that the industries, by and large, trying to do the right thing. But why is there so much criticism, you think, and mistrust, especially among the American people when it comes to the industry, right? A few years ago, the Gallup poll rated the industry the least trusted industry, the pharmaceutical industry, least trusted industry among all the major industries in the country. And even after COVID, right? And you have Pfizer, you have Moderna, they came out with the vaccines relatively quickly. there's still a lot of mistrust, a lot of conspiracy theories out there about the pharmaceutical industry. Why do you think that exists, and what could the industry do to kind of improve its image, you think?
You know, it's a very tough industry to get any sort of credit for. Um, when you deal with people's health, it's not always cut and dry and very clear about how to deal with these issues. I think there's a lack of transparency
Mm,
to a certain extent. I think, you know, when you look at industries, let's say like the automobile industry, you know that, you know, there are rare materials that have to come from around the world. You know what the manufacturing looks like. You know what the end product, how it's created, and where it's used. And there are variations of obviously high end versus, I would say, you know, more economical versus whatever else in between, right?
mhm.
So it's much more of an open book industry than I would say pharma is. Pharma, because of I would say the hurdles that need to be sort of jumped over to get to an approval for a drug. There's so many components of it, and so much I would say data that needs gathering and being able to be reviewed. You know, when you tell someone that, you know, we'll approve this drug if it shows 2 weeks efficacy in this cancer over another
Right,
drug. Now, if you ask the general population what that 2 week, they're like 2 weeks, it's nothing.
right.
Ask the patient that's getting the drug
Mhm.
and needs it how they feel about that 2 weeks. So there is a discrepancy of understanding what it means to create these drugs and make these drugs and what it takes and who it's going for and what that actually, you know, the cost of patients in general, the burden is not just the therapy, right? People forget that it's not only therapies, it's the family, what they go through. You know, I losing my father in August to pancreatic cancer,
Mm,
I can't tell you how many bills I had to pay beyond just his therapy, right? And it's I don't complain about it, but nonetheless, there's so much more. The transportation, the nutritional, the you know, forget the human toll, right? The psychological toll it takes on patients. So there is a burden, a cost burden that's also put on families that goes beyond just the drugs. And the one thing that we haven't actually brought up is insurance companies.
mhm.
And you know, I it's a topic that on its own can be quite contentious. You know, because insurance companies play a huge role in all this. They are the middleman, but how they actually act as a middleman determines really a lot of what we see out there, right? Um, you know, the insurance companies will say, well, you know, we can't cover this because it costs too much. And yet the pharma company goes, well, you know, it took us so many years to get to this drug and so much labor and so much, you know, invested in this. We need to be able to recapture at least partially, or if not a little bit more than what we put into it. And the government says, well, we have only so much money that we can collect from people from their taxes that we can actually allow for this to happen. You know, so who's right, who's wrong, who wins? You know,
Yeah.
there's a huge component to all this.
Yeah, I think, yeah, and I think, if you ask the average person, what is a PBM and how do they make money? And I think most people probably don't know. And you're right. I mean, the reality is the way the model works right now is in actuality, the pharma companies are kind of almost forced in some ways to charge a higher price because the PBM wants to get a higher rebate, right? And then they put them on a more favorable formulary status to be able to get the drug approved, right, when the patient gets it prescribed. So yeah, I agree with you. There's multiple factors, and I mean that's a whole kind of video by itself in terms of PBMs and what they do.
Bunch of it.
um, yeah, exactly. All right, so I know we're getting ready to wrap up. I want to ask you one last question. So you obviously, you've had a lot of great experience working on the healthcare side, on the pharma side, and there's been a lot of changes over the last 10 to 15 years. I think not just in the industry professionally, but even just culturally. I think in the United States, the way in which I think the younger generation of people see corporations and what they do, and I have at the ACMA folks all different age levels, and I see those generational gaps in terms of just how to think about work at a very basic level and those principles of hard work. What have you seen, or what are you seeing, in terms of how that tide is changing post COVID in the corporate world, especially with younger Americans? What would be like a message that would want to relay to younger people coming out in the workforce in terms of really trying to, I guess, be most effective and most likely to be successful? What are some of the principles that you would kind of pass on to them based on your experience?
It's another loaded question. There's so many there's so many points that you can sort of touch on. Um, we come with a certain bias from watching our folks and the way they worked, right? I mean, I even hear my wife say sometimes to my kids, your dad worked so hard for you,
Right.
and that works hard is sort of an amorphous, you know, just entity that lives above us. What does that mean? You know, um, I I watch how there are companies today that have told their workers, you got to come back into the office, okay? And then we have the argument on the other side that says, but during COVID, while I was never in the office and I was on meetings, I got so much more work done.
Mm-hmm.
And you have more of the younger generation of people coming up that don't know what those office days look like, where, many of us believe that being in an office was so beneficial. Many of the greatest ideas came from walking to the water fountain and bumping into somebody and having a discussion,
Mm-hmm.
or a thought that you could just reach out to the person that was in the cubicle or in their office, a few doors down, and voila, something came out of it. Plus, how many deals have been made by looking at somebody face to face? How many times have you walked into a meeting and just by the body language, where this is going?
Right.
Which you can't pick up today because you and I, we could just be wearing shorts underneath and no one will know the difference, right? Shorts, sandals, and we're good. But I can't tell what you're thinking just by looking at you at a camera.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a different view from what we lived in. And now, especially our generation, we also see what it's going to and where it's going to. And we see the benefits of both. But what I tell people is if you get a chance, meet somebody, talk to them in person. There's so much more information that you're going to get just by a phone call or a Zoom call. But don't let that be your only means of work. It has to be a little bit more holistic. And really the way kids today are, they're so, media and electronically dependent that it's changed the way we perceived work from back in the day. You know, and I watch the younger generation, how much they rely so much more on other means than what you and I are used to seeing, right?
Sure. Sure.
A handshake and a smile would take it so far. Nowadays, it doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
So what I tell people is just don't discount what's happened. My grandfather used to say, where you are, I've been, and where I am now, one day you will, find yourself. And the experiences that led me at your age and your, at your time being a youth to where I am today, it plays a huge role. Don't discount them. So I tell people, make sure that when you work in this industry, especially, you capture as much of the in person as you can, but make sure you also have an understanding that there is a life beyond just work. And many of us have also benefited of staying home more. Prior to COVID, you knew when I was the chief medical officer at Ipsen, I had to be in Paris 5 to 10 days a month,
Right. I remember you told me
Boston
that.
5 days a month, and then the rest of the time my family. You know, I think I lost so much and really didn't gain that much career wise
Right.
that they, was absolutely necessary. What you give up to get may not be always what you wanted in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what I've seen, especially for the younger group that is coming out now, they are focused a little bit more on the whole picture of work-life balance and what they're looking for in their lives. And I think that actually may be a better way, but they should look to the way we did things and maybe, if not learn from them, at least learn from our mistakes and see how we can actually improve, because there is a better way than what we're used to doing. And I think there's a much more better life that we can actually bring to ourselves. So, I've taken it to a lifestyle sort of way of thinking, but I think it's absolutely necessary and important.
I absolutely agree. I think those are all important points. I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Dr. Sotirios Sturgiopoulos, CEO of A2A Pharmaceuticals. Thank you, Sotirios, for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Always great to see you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.